Hey everybody, my name is Joe Caprio. I want to welcome you all to the second in a series of Real Talk webinars hosted by myself and sponsored or in part with the PreSales Collective. I'm really excited for the show today, and I'm going to share my screen and get you into the content. I'm really proud of the guests and the panelists that we've got on the show right now. But before I introduce them, I'll take a second and just talk about why I'm excited to host the Real Talk series with PreSales. So in my mind, Reprise is just coming out of stealth mode. We're a brand new business, and we aim to be the demo creation platform that pre-sales professionals use to create and control their demo environments. And so I joined the pre-sales collective to really learn about the community and about the role and really get hands-on with the front line and figure out what this job is like. And I got to tell you, it's been an amazing experience for me getting to interact with folks over Slack and watch the webinars, listen to the podcasts, and really just have like a lot of the engagement that James and Yuji give us in the network. And I think it's overdue. I think it's a long time coming that we start to take this part of our organization seriously and start to enable them with technology and support. And so I'm really proud to host this series of conversations where I'm surveying the front lines, I'm surveying the entire community, and I'm asking you to give us insight into what's really challenging, for pre-sales professionals and where the friction is and where the bottlenecks are, where the pain is. And then James and Yuji have been kind enough to keep feeding me expert lists of panelists to come in here and answer those concerns and tell you how they solve those problems in their professional life or for their organization. And the dynamic that we're creating here is very much like an open and anonymous forum where you can tell us the things you want us to talk about and the problems you want us to address. And then I'm not going to tell you how to solve these problems. I'm going to go get the experts and let them tell you that. So a month ago, we talked about the biggest gripes we have with our sales counterparts. And this time we're going to take a more holistic view and say, hey, there's some things I'm going to improve for next year. I'm going to set out some New Year's resolutions. And there are some things that I would expect my colleagues to fix. And we're going to talk about the resolutions we're making as a department and as individuals. And then we're going to get advice from these expert panelists on how to make those resolutions come true. Okay. And so to start, what I'll do is I'll have each of the panelists introduce themselves, and we'll have a little fun with an icebreaker today. So we'll share our name and we'll talk about what we do, and then we'll share our New Year's resolution. And we're going to go from left to right, starting with my friend Stephanie Daniel from Docusign.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Daniel, the Director of Solution Engineering at Docusign. Been there about 7 years. And, as I think about what I'm answering the New Year's resolution question, I assume. As I think about going into next year, one of the things I actually heard Cindy speak on a panel before, and she mentioned a book, Weapons of Mass Destruction. And that one is very interesting to me right now. So I'm going to finish that one. And the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to relearn Korean. I'm going to take a community course college in it, really dedicate my time to that so that I can, in the future, hopefully take my mother back to her home country. And I want to kind of surprise her with that.
It's incredible. Thank you, Stephanie, and welcome. Dave, how about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Dave Douglas. I'm a pre-sales leader in the Silicon Valley. In terms of my resolutions, I think all of us are excited for returning to normal and freely roaming the earth again. And we all have family time and things that we didn't get to do in 2020 that we're certainly looking forward to doing in 21. My family's going to be going through a change with my oldest son going to college, and so preparing for that and just making the most of that transition. Professionally, though, I would say one of the things that I was reminded this week was I had a fantastic pre-sales collective donut interaction inside of Slack. And so for all of you who are part of pre-sales, and if you haven't taken advantage of one of the donut opportunities to meet other parts of the community, it's something I'm going to be thinking about and doing more intentionally, is just taking advantage of the opportunity to meet so many interesting folks that are part of the collective.
I love that. I've had some really, really enjoyable conversations using Donut. I wish everybody would participate. It's actually my favorite part of the community. So yeah, I'm with you on that
Mine
one.
too.
Zach, how about yourself, my friend?
I love to hear the stories about Donut. I love it as well. I'm Zach Lorick. I'm a solutions engineering leader and value consulting leader at Slack. Have been there for about 2.5 years, a little over. My personal New Year's resolution is I'm going to teach my son how to fish. He's about 5 years old right now, and it's a great COVID activity because the lakes are easy to get out to. And then professionally, I'd like to lean even further into the pre-sales collective community. I think there's just so much value from learning from all the folks that we have in the leadership collective and the broader community. And I'd like to spend more time kind of giving back to the community as well. So thanks for having me.
I'm really, really happy to have you. Cindy, do you want to round us out here?
Sure, happy to. My name is Cindy Goodwin-Sack. I lead the global virtual sales engineering organization at Cisco. And so my personal New Year's resolution is actually kind of intertwined with my work one. I need to finish my doctorate. My goal is to have the whole thing complete by the end of April, and it's been a long journey, so it'd be nice to wrap that up. And then apply some of the research I'm doing against some of the work I'm doing at Cisco to decrease the time to expertise by another 50%.
Wow, that's really impressive, Cindy. That is really, really impressive. Okay, now I'm embarrassed. I'll go last. I'm Joe Caprio. I'm the co-founder at Reprise, and my New Year's resolution is to stop paying recruiter fees. And so at Reprise, we're aggressively hiring for pre-sales professionals. And so to help me make this resolution come true, come inbound and DM me or DM Alexandra Beretta, who leads my pre-sales team, and help me stop paying recruiter fees as I recruit my pre-sales team. All right, let's get into the content here. I'm going to share the results of the poll with the audience here as we go into the next slide, which is basically just kind of a recap on the data that we've collected for this session. So we survey the community every time, and then we also invite you to kind of engage with us in Slack leading up to the event. And I always think that, it makes me happy when data makes sense. And so I want to give a little context for the folks that engaged. And so I asked the question of where are you in the organization? And I thought we had a really nice spread of ICs, functional leaders, and then like team leads. And so all up and down the levels of pre-sales here are the people that engaged in the survey. And then I wanted to go for a couple that I thought were interesting. Like, are you paired up one-to-one with your seller, or are you paired up in a pod or in a round robin? And I was surprised by this to find it overwhelmingly a one-to-one relationship, or maybe like a 1-to-2 relationship, but dedicated pairings versus round robin, which was interesting to me. I didn't know that was the majority, or to that degree, a majority. And then the last thing I asked about was sales compensate or variable compensation. And if you're on a variable comp model, what's the variable tied to? And again, like overwhelmingly, people said that the variable component for pre-sales is tied to revenue. And so I thought that might be a good, first question to kick to the panelists. And so I'll go with Stephanie for this first question. Do you think that pre-sales should be tied to a revenue goal? Or do you think that pre-sales should have a variable component at all? And the reason I wanted to start with this is we actually got some really nice anonymous submissions in the survey. 3 different people really responded to this and gave various reasons why maybe they don't like being tied to revenue. So, Stephanie, from your point of view, is this the right way to compensate your pre-sales team?
It's kind of an interesting question for me, as coming into Docusign was the first sales role and actually into the solution engineering role for me. So it's not one that I have like a whole breadth of experience on, kind of being tied to multiple areas. I think it's one of those things that I, usually kick to. This is what the pre-sales, the collective is great for, is to be able to reach out to other people in the org, across other industries and other companies to see like what they have been doing. And I've been hearing a lot of different ways in which people have been compensated. One of the core components for me in our compensation to our solution engineers is just the variable component that's tied to the team and the segment that they're associated with really does foster a sense of team trying to pull everybody towards the same goal, right? We have a lot of people that are willing to help out everyone else because they want to make sure that, they get paid at the end of the day. So it's one in which that I don't have a ton of experience on. It's something that I continue to learn from my peers across the other companies in the industries that are represented here and across the collective.
Amazing. Thank you for the insight. Does anyone else want to weigh in before we move to the next topic?
I'll just give you a large.
Go ahead, Cindy.
Oh, go ahead. Just from a larger firm perspective, I would say that at some point, once your systems, your sales force gets so large, or your systems engineering force gets so large, you can end up on the team goals, like Stephanie said, or fostering teamwork. Well, some individuals can do a significantly more amount of the work than others, right? And so it can be easier to get lost in the crowd. So I think there's potentially a balance of activity and revenue, and also agility in compensation. So potentially changing your compensation model, because over time you're going to want to evolve your organization and drive different behavior. So I think it's very situational, depending on the size of the organization and the organizational overall position in the market.
I can tell you from a sales leader's point of view, we really don't know how to compensate the role, and we're often, asking for templates and just going with like first available. So this to me is a really, really interesting concept, and I think maybe we'll revisit it, again and again in this format. So why don't we move into the New Year's resolutions? I'm going to start with the resolutions that pre-sales professionals have resolved to make. So these are the changes that we want to make, things that we want to get better at, things that we want to shore up in our own, professional toolkit. And the most common themes are just like protecting our time, not letting time wasters through, not agreeing to the meetings, or not getting roped into the meetings, and not taking on, non-productive tasks. And then thinking about blocking our calendar. Not the same as boxing out time wasters, but boxing out our personal life and making sure that we protect that work-life balance. And then, focusing on sales skills and deal execution was the third professional resolution that I saw. And then a lot of folks told me that, I'm really going to focus on the resolutions outside of work because that's what I think of with New Year's resolutions. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through here, and I'm going to ask for some advice from the panelists. I'm going to start with Dave on not accepting bad deals or time wasters into my life. If I wanted to make this my New Year's resolution, what advice could you give me to make sure it actually came true?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the big things here is to try to reevaluate your filters. Each of us bears the responsibility of what we agree to do, and the time that we spend in one direction is time we can't spend in something else. There's the notion of, are you living under the tyranny of the urgent? Versus actually doing what's really important. Often the most current email is not the most important, but it certainly has the appearance of urgency. And so how are you deciphering and thinking about connecting that to your goals? I think it's one of those where if you don't know the goal you're trying to put in your self-evaluation now, your filters are going to be difficult to understand. And you're just going to be able to you may end up just trying to please people or doing what you like to do, versus actually driving towards the goals that your organization is expecting of you. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that you can better evaluate. Is this moving me closer to my goal? Or is this just me trying to please someone? Now, if pleasing someone's your goal, then that's your goal. But it's one of those where you need to have a better understanding of what you're trying to do, what's your value to the organization, and continue to discover that confidence to say no.
Boy, my wife recently moved into a new role where she's a bit of an overlay. She's at AWS. She used to be on the marketing team, and now she's on the partner team. And so she supports a team of 8 direct sellers, and she attaches a partner to every deal. And so now all of a sudden she went from running a marketing function to being, on call, so to speak. And it's a new dynamic where folks are just adding her to meetings. And so, she's had to redo that urgent and important matrix, and kind of take command back of her life and say, it's really easy to just go with the flow. I want to be there for my team. I want to support them. But yeah, you do still have to control the controllables and make sure you're not getting stuck in the urgent, non-important quadrant of the matrix.
I heard a phrase. I'd love to credit it, but I can't remember where I heard it. But it was no agenda, no attenda. If there's not an agenda meeting, don't bother going, and you better know why you're showing up to that. So I don't always have that courage, and if your boss is saying you got to be there, you got to be there. But where you can, think about that.
No agenda, no attenda is absurd enough to make it into my lexicon. So I think I might just borrow that one. Zach, let's think about going beyond just focusing on the productive work activities and just generally time boxing our work separately from our life. What advice could you give me if I said, this is what I want to work on next year? I really want to protect myself, my weekends, my nights and mornings. What tactical advice could you give to me?
Well, I'd say directly related to this phrase here, if you're going to block your calendar and block that for deep work, you have to abide by those blocks. Otherwise, very quickly, they get booked over and you make exceptions. And once you make a first exception, you'll make a second or a third. So you really have to hold by that. You also have to, I think, get your manager's sponsorship and support for this as well, get their suggestion. Because I think, from a flip side, a manager can also help you defend that time as well. And in a pre-sales function, this is really hard because we're tied to net new revenue, customer and opportunity driven. And oftentimes it's the customer that's, deciding, when and where we meet. So it's really hard to abide by this on a really consistent basis. But I think it's really important, especially for folks that have deep work to be done in their role or function. I think it also, sort of related to the last topic on how you avoid time wasters or more efficient or an essentialist as you approach your own calendar. I think it's always healthy at the end of the week or even just twice a month to do an analysis of where you spent your time, do some reflection, because I think that can be pretty enlightening in terms of when and why you're spending your time. And you can make adjustments on a regular basis. I found that really refreshing for myself. For my manager, my boss, I do a weekly download of these are all the things that I've done with highlights. Plug for Slack, Workflow Builder. You can create a little workflow template for yourself that reminds you on the end of the week to create that weekly summary. And then I have folks on my team do it as well. And it's really helpful, refreshing, and it helps you understand where you're actually spending your time. And I think topics.
Zach, you said a few things that I thought were really, really brilliant. First of all, calling out that I'm saying let's protect our weekends and our nights, and you're saying and your deep work. And that's really, really important. There's more than just being a customer-facing agent to this role, and I think as salespeople we kind of forget that, where we're always looking for the next meeting, pushing for the next meeting, and we may put 50 hours in your calendar. And think that's fine, I'm working 50 hours too, but you folks have a lot of work that's non-customer facing, and protecting that deep work block is really, really important. And then the time and motion study, wow, Google Calendar kind of does this for you for the most part. It's really simple to go back in time and see where you spent your time and make sure it's in line with what you should be doing. Those are just really, really good ideas. Thank you. There was a question from the audience over chat, and I think it's relevant. So maybe we'll go back to Cindy. The question is, how much protection should my manager give me when it comes to blocking my calendar? Can I rely on my manager? Should my manager be involved in this, or is this really up to me to push back and defend?
I think it's a combination. So any good seller is going to go complain when you say no. I mean, that's why they're salespeople, because they'll just keep going back after they're rejected, right? So I think it's a pre-negotiation between the individual and their manager as to how much working time needs to be blocked. And sometimes if you're just studying for certification, it might be several days in a row, right? But so it's a pre-negotiation. Then I think it's absolutely the responsibility to have the engineers back on the time. And it might be that you pre-negotiate a couple of critical things. Maybe there's a customer satisfaction issue, and there are some areas where you can pre-negotiate, but absolutely it's the responsibility of the manager to have the engineers back. But the engineer also has to say no first. I'm a firm believer, every time, if you don't value your own time, no one else will. So you have to start as an SE by valuing your own time, saying no, and then your manager should have your back.
You're here. Perfect.
I want to add there, because this is something that's near and dear to my heart as well. I agree with Cindy, and also agree that if an individual SE can't uphold their own professional standards, it's going to be really difficult to even get a manager to support those as well. And that's something that we talk about as folks, develop in their career. That's something that they get really good at and really helps to feed a positive relationship with your AE, which is most important.
Amazing. Let's shift gear to the third resolution for pre-sales professionals, and I'm gonna ask Stephanie to address this one. It's about sales execution. It's about deal execution. If I were a pre-sales pro and I wanted to get better at executing on deals and helping to move prospects through the sales motion, are there tactical things that you would recommend they do?
Well, kind of in the theme of resolutions and so forth, I think one of the reasons why resolutions fail is because they're not very specific. And so, when you think about trying to focus on improving your, that execution and focusing in on the skills, that you need to be very specific about what those goals are that you're trying to achieve. And I think that, you can't, you think about all of the things that we encounter in the sales motion and all the things that we need to be ready to address. I don't think it would be a hard thing or hard pressed thing to say, hey, I'm going to work on, my interpersonal relationships. I'm going to work on, being that trusted leader. I'm going to work on my technical aptitude. I'm going to work on all of these different things. I think it's just like, quit trying to boil the ocean and maybe really try to narrow your focus to maybe one or, a couple of things and be very specific about what you're trying to achieve there. If you do that, I think that you can start to zero in and then even start to ask for some of the feedback from your peers, from your AE counterparts, from your managers around, how you've maybe progressed from, the day one when you set that goal to day, 30, 60, 90, as you go out further on that as well. But just focus on what you're trying to achieve and try to make it very, very specific and tangible. So that you can see and measure that progress over time.
That is amazing advice. That is perfect advice. Let's try it. Let's get specific on one piece of sales execution that we could get better at. And I'm gonna kick this to all four panelists and see who's got an opinion on it. This was a question. This was an anonymous submission from the audience. And what they would like to see improve in terms of sales execution were account execs offering trials or proof of concepts as the next step, just because they don't have anything else better to offer. And so I think of it like professional hockey, when you do dump and chase and you fling the puck down the other end of the ice and you just skate after it and hope that you catch it, right? I'm dumping my prospects into a trial because I hope you fall in love with the product, and my sales engine over here is going to set you up. So let's get tactical here. Who from the panelists has advice?
So don't they call that icing?
Yeah, icing, exactly.
Well, Joe, I mean, half of this is the problem is in the questions being asked, right? The notion here is there's a lack of communication and coordination and synergy between the AE and the SE. There isn't a plan. It's spray and pray. It's an improvised approach to the account. We're not focusing on relationships. We're not focusing on business needs. And so if an SE is asking this type of question or is struggling with this, it demonstrates a lack of candor and functional relationship between those two. That they're not actually having real conversations or real debriefs. And so that's where I would want them to spend more time, is actually talking about what are we doing week in and week out, not necessarily about a specific deal, but what is the total strategy that we're looking at. I think that's it. This is not the real problem. This is a symptom to a different problem.
I was just going to tack onto that. I like the thought of mutual close plans, and that's one of the things that I think about with doing that with your account executive, is sitting with them, talking to them about the deals, the opportunities that you're going after, and build out that mutual close plan. Talk about what is the if this is what we're selling, what's the next step in this process, and then as you're thinking through that, go do the back and forth. Play out the scenario. And so then, start to agree on if these are the opportunities that we're attacking, then this is what that next step is going to look like. And then you continue to walk down that path. It's not always going to be perfect, but for the most part, you can come back to that plan that you guys created, that strategy you guys created. And, you know, when someone deviates from that, you know, that plan, you can come back and say, hey, we went off the rails. Let's come back and, you know, did that work? Is it something that we need to change, and then kind of continue to move forward? But you have to partner with your account executives. And the fact in that poll that you mentioned earlier around, there's a lot more of that direct alignment rather than that round robin. This is what fosters that whole relationship. If you have those direct alignments, that's what it's there for. Talk to your AEs.
Boy, Stephanie, you know, that reminds me of managing AEs and BDRs. And I've had account execs come to me to complain about their BDR. You know, this BDR doesn't get it. This BDR is not performing. And my feedback to them is, well, that makes a lot of sense because they're typically entry level. And this is typically their first job or one of their first couple of jobs. And so you can ask me to keep rolling that person over and bringing you another person who's just as wet behind the ears, or you can invest the time to make that person better at their job and be a mentor. And in doing so, earn the respect and like the appreciation. So they actually want to do the work for you. And it kind of sounds like we're saying the same thing to the pre-sales team. Like, hey, that account exec might just need some mentoring and some help. And maybe you could help kind of expose how this doesn't work. And let's think about working it the right way in the future. As a sales leader, I'll take accountability for this one. I've been on sales teams. I've managed sales teams where the reps say, what's the next step? Oh, the next step is a trial, you know, and they just default to it because I win 60% from trial. And so I'm going to push people into trial because it's a 60% chance I win. But that's not really how it works. And if I encounter this situation, I think it's a fault of sales leadership and sales enablement for not educating the sales team that there are multiple paths forward on a deal. And it's not always dump them into a trial and let the pre-sales team clean up your mess. So I think a big part of this is you should push back to sales leadership if you can find a mildly political way to do that without burning your colleague. All right, why don't we shift gears a little bit, because we're kind of getting to that point. I asked the pre-sales community what they wanted to work on, and a lot of the anonymous submissions were just what we want our teammates to work on. So it seems like that's more interesting to the audience. So let's get to the meat of it. What are the things that we demand our colleagues and our teammates get better at next year? Again, I want them to stop putting the time wasters on my calendar, right? I want to have a clear understanding of what career pathing is in pre-sales. As a sales VP, I've seen BDR level 1 through 5, SMB, mid-market, and enterprise account exec, sales rep, sales manager, sales VP. I've seen clear career pathing for sales, but I haven't seen it for pre-sales. And so I'm interested in your feedback on the second point. Compensating according to market rates. Again, this seems to be a real hot button for the community members. And so I'd love to hear how we think about ensuring we compensate our pre-sales teams fairly. And then the last one I'm interested in is getting more clarity on a scope, right? Or mutual success plan, as you mentioned. And so those are the 5 we're gonna tackle here. And we're gonna start with Zach on getting other people to respect our time and not waste our time with time wasters. What advice would you give us to get that policy or that change from our teammates, Zach? And you're on mute, just so you know, my friend.
Yeah. And it's similar to the last question. Stop wasting pre-sales team with bad deals or useless tasks.
This is about being a change agent at your company. How would you recommend a pre-sales professional gets this change made at his or her company?
It's a good one. If somebody else has something that pops up more immediately, I think it does go back to my original comment that, part of your job as a successful SE, and the most successful SEs I've seen in my career are those that really have strong and established professional standards. So they know what is a good use of their time and they know what isn't, and they're able to communicate that in a diplomatic way. Because the partnership that you have with an AE is the most important partnership you have as an SE. And where I've seen folks fall down and fail in this role as an SE or SE leader is when that AE partnership breaks down. And this can be a big part of it. And you have to consider the people at play as well, right? You've got AEs who have a quota. Sometimes times are tough. And so they have, less deals and they're asking you to do more than you normally would. So you have to consider the people at play, the partnership and the relationship. but ultimately it's up to you to communicate what is a good use of your time, and to do that early and often with your account executive. So I would say, as if I was giving an advice to somebody coming in new into an organization or new into a relationship, I would say before you ever hop on a deal with somebody is to pick up the phone or hop on a Zoom or whatever your favorite method of communication is these days, and talk about that openly, to say like, here's where I like to spend my time. Here's where I'm really effective. Here's the sort of stuff that you're not going to use me for, and get that out there in the open up front, and also establish ground rules for how you deal with conflict as it relates to this topic. Because it's not cut and dry. It's not a binary approach. If you run into something that maybe falls outside the scope of your established professional standards, you have to have a mechanism for discussing that with your AE and your AE leaders.
I think that last point's really important, Zach. The mechanism to kind of expose and align on what's appropriate or not is really, really important. I inherited a dysfunctional team once where the AEs and the SEs were kind of at each other. They were unhappy with one another, and this was the problem. And so I felt like we really couldn't remediate the situation until we better understood it. And so we would put a policy in place that the AEs would submit a request for SE help. And then when the meeting was over, the SE would submit a recap of the meeting. And the goal was to see how often the prep and the outcome matched. And so we were essentially thinking like loss reasons for an account exec. We were thinking like meeting outcomes for pre-sales. And we found that, about 70% of the time, the prep note didn't match the outcome. And so we, segmented down to just that list of meetings. And as we started to tear it down and investigate what was really going on, we found that if the rep didn't know what was going on, they'd say, this is going to be great, awesome deal, put them in the trial, they're going to love it. And we realized that, the problem was expectation setting from the top. We put new rules in place and fixed the situation. So I think, identifying if you have a way to remediate the situation is a good first step. And if not, then working on that communication, like medium might actually, have the solution, present itself.
Yeah, it helps to have a universal policy, of course, as well. When you engage in SE, where, what type of deals, that stuff is all important.
For everyone except your top rep, right?
Yeah, for everybody. And it depends on the scale too, right? Like I've been a part of SE organizations where like 3 SEs were supporting 60 reps, and you have to have a request process in place for that. You have to scale it, or you have, a 1-to-1 ratio, and that's a totally different dynamic. So it's just important to talk about this stuff early and often, I think, and establish the right standards.
Beautiful. I'm going to wait 10 minutes and come back and ask you how to protect SE's times. For now, though, we're going to move on to Cindy. Cindy, I'm going to ask you a question on this one. Career pathing for pre-sales. Is it as simple as creating levels, or is it much more complicated than that? Because I honestly don't understand.
So almost every organization has levels and they have career paths, and yet I get asked this question all the time. I don't understand what the career path is for an SE, and it's clearly it's clearly defined. And what I would say is there is no one career path for all individuals everywhere. There's only the career path for you. So what do you like to do? What do you want to do? And then you create your own career path. So Joe, you mentioned, there being a career path for BDRs and, LDRs, but that's just someone else's concept of a linear progression. That is not actually a career path. And at some point you run out of steps. And then I meet SEs all the time who say, well, how do I get the next promotion? And at some point you say, well, the work that you do is only worth X dollars. Like, sorry, go do something else. So I would ask, what is it that you want out of life? Where do you love where do you get your energy? What do you love doing? And create your own career path out of that. And just, if you sit around and wait for somebody to give it to you, you will just completely waste your time, which we all have agreed here is not a good thing to do.
I love it, Cindy. I love it. I actually agree with your answer. And I think even though the pathing in sales is typically pretty clear, I agree with you. It's the fastest way to get to, level 3B and then level 4A. And it's like, is that really a career path, or is that just
right,
like what you normally would have thought of as like cost of living increase every couple of years, right?
Right. Joe, I will say, I literally had a manager tell me once that, so he had worked for a Cisco partner and then come over to Cisco. And he told me once that he was literally living beyond his means. And so he needed a promotion so that he could maintain his lifestyle. And I'm like, I'm sorry, but you're not worth that to me. I'm like, I appreciate that you would like to make more money, but the job is only worth this much. So if you want to live a very extravagant life, you probably want the skills and the role that allow for that. You should work towards that.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. I'll use that the next time I'm negotiating down a vendor's quote. I'll say, hey, I've got a lot of stuff I want to do with this money besides pay vendors.
That's right.
We'll see if it works there.
There you go. There you go.
Okay, we're going to go back to Stephanie for this one, and we're going to talk about sales compensation. How do you make sure you're compensating pre-sales against market rates? Like, how do you even find market rates? And if you're a pre-sales professional, how do you make sure that you're getting treated fairly when it comes to comp? I've given you softballs, aren't I?
Yeah. I would say that, one, I mean, you just kind of go with like, there's sort of industry, sort of standards out there. You can kind of take a look at, what's happening in peer industries and so forth. But I think at this point in time, there's just, it's, how do you know? I think that you just have to, understand your own motivation for the work that you do, right? And you have to know that, when you're going into this role, that that you are satisfied with that work that you're putting into place. And everybody has their own, like, hey, this is what I need to be able to live and to survive and to raise my family and take care of, the things I need to take care of. And that's your own number. It's not necessarily the number for the job. So I think that when it comes to ensuring that you are, paid the appropriate compensation and so forth, you just have to look to yourself to just make sure, am I happy with the role that I have and the comp that I'm actually receiving? If you're not, then we go back to Cindy's response, which is go out there and find something.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a very Maslow's hierarchy of needs approach to the answer, where compensation is not just your OTE. There's a lot that goes into it, and what makes you happy at a company, and you kind of need to feel within yourself and see what matters to you most, and are you getting those things? I find more often than not when there are conflicts around compensation, it's that the employee, so to speak, wishes that organization compensated the way that they want, versus saying, how do I want to be compensated, and what type of organization would compensate me that way? And I think we actually have a lot of control over our comp model if we're strategic with the type of org we try to work for in the first place. But for any other panelists, like hyper tactical, you're in a role, you don't feel like you're being treated fairly in terms of OTE. Let's just really narrow it down. What resources do you have? What avenues can you take to try to expose that and get it out there?
I would say,
Well, go ahead.
I would just say I think it's easier than it ever was to source industry data on a respective role or function, especially if you have a title like solutions engineer. Glassdoor is fairly accurate for individual contributors, I would say. And also, if you're working for a healthy organization, they should be willing to communicate their comp philosophy with you. And it doesn't mean that you can get paid as much as every other company. And if that's the most important thing for you, that is one factor. But you can also understand what percentage of market rate your company, the philosophy of your company as it relates to market compensation. So some people want to be 70% of market rate, some people want to be 100%, and it's important to communicate that, I think, in the context of total rewards as well, because OT is one thing, but you've got benefits, you've got equity, of course, you've got the upside for working for a small company versus a large company. There's just a lot of things to consider. So speaking about that holistically with an individual, I think, is really important, and for an individual to do a holistic assessment of what's important to them, as Stephanie mentioned.
I'm a big believer that where you're planted right now is your greatest opportunity, right? If you can actually just focus on delivering remarkable results, either your organization will reward that because you're delivering the results they care about, or your resume is going to be that much more compelling for another organization. So while there's that aspirational dreaming and wishing, right today, there's an opportunity to move your career forward by actually doing great work. And, you know, when you think about it, it's just about doing great results that are universally agreeable. And I think that's some of the challenges is I work really hard, or I'm doing a lot of activities and busyness, but can you actually articulate the results you're delivering that your organization values, your manager values, and does the industry value? And I think that takes some broader perspective. You need to take a step back and try to figure out how can I best articulate the work that I do and be able to help others respect the value that I can bring.
It's outstanding feedback. One other thing you can do is come inbound at Reprise because we pay upper end of market. Segueing into our final audience topic. This is an interesting one for me because this came up a lot last month too. It came up in both surveys. A lot of the anonymous submissions were about this, and it's basically an attack on sales leadership. We don't even understand what pre-sales does. And I think a lot of the friction, if you think back to the topics we've covered right now, a lot of the friction comes down to this. We in sales don't even really understand what the role is like, and therefore our expectations are off and our commitments are off and the way we communicate, it's all off. And I think it all stems from the top. It stems from the head of sales not really understanding what the pre-sales function is. And then, you know, that head of sales, you know, lack of understanding is carried out throughout the sales organization, and it impacts a lot of the sales and pre-sales interactions we have. And so I was excited to see some people kind of take to this one and say, yeah, you know, if I could make a resolution next year, it would be to spread awareness and increase the understanding in my own organization for what my function is about. And I think that would resolve a lot of the underlying conflicts. So open to the group of panelists here. Do any of you have an experience in your professional life where you've run a project to increase the awareness and understanding of what the pre-sales org does? And could you share that and kind of give people a model to follow? You know, how do I get people to understand my role?
We recently developed an SE playbook, which kind of outlines the key activities SE performs as a part of the sales process at a very high level. And it provides great context to celebrate the behavior, the high impact behavior from the SE team as well. And I think a lot of the stuff that we've talked about thus far today is more, I would say, the responsibility of the individual, but I would say this is absolutely the responsibility of the leader to help establish what it is the pre-sales organization is about, have those relationships with enablement, sales leadership. And I view this as a big part of my role as well, is to continue to advocate and celebrate the behavior we're looking to encourage across the organization. And I think that's the best way to do it, is to share great examples of great work and people finally understand the context.
SE playbook sounds amazing. It sounds incredible. It's such a great idea. How do you create it? Do you just borrow from like the sales enablement team, or did you actually, you know, bring in like an outside, you know, service or elect a captain from pre-sales?
This is actually something that my peer on the East led, but brought with her from a previous role and adapted it to Slack. And it really just helps frame the high-level SE activities, like we call a solution overview, a demo, discovery, in the context of the broader sales process. So it helps both SEs understand, you know, where they fit into the sales process. And then, of course, we went on a roadshow with all the AE and AE leadership teams and helped educate them on the SE playbook as well. And it was pretty effective. It's an ongoing journey. I mean, as you know, you have to stay top of mind on these things. But it provides context for that conversation on an ongoing basis as well, which is important.
Yeah, that is, Zach, that is really, really interesting. That is really, really cool. An SE playbook that the entire sales, the entire go-to-market function can read and grok and then understand. And then, I mean, at a minimum, it just kind of gives you something to point back to. You know, look at page 4. It says this is the way we're supposed to do it. So I think that's really, really incredible.
That's the importance of that roadshow that he just mentioned, and the fact that you're doing that on a regular basis, that you are meeting with the sales leaders regularly. One of the things that I encourage is, you know, any of the ICs out there to attend all of those sales meetings and to actually carve out time in any of those meetings as well, to kind of continue to reiterate, like, here's where my value resides. especially as they speak up in those sales meetings and talk about, listen to the strategies of the sales team, being able to, also influence, incorporate some of their thoughts into the process as well. So I think it's a continual process, and especially as you think about all the turnover in sales in the first place, you want to continue to just hammer home that idea over and over and over again, that this is what I'm here for. This is what my team is here for, by making sure that you are ever present in every QBR, every sales meeting, every, all of it.
Amen. Heavy +1 on that one.
Yeah.
Never stop. And it won't, one meeting is not going to do the trick. That's for sure.
Exactly.
You can only see the panelists' faces, but I have a feeling the entire audience is just nodding right now. Yes, that is the right answer. All right, this last question, actually, I decided to jump ahead and replace it with an audience submission. And I thought it was interesting because, we thought one of the things we should do is get clear scopes and requirements for these projects. And then an anonymous submission from the audience was, exactly that. Like, how do I get the sales rep to actually do discovery and then share those notes with me before I'm expected to hop on and perform? And so when I see questions like this, like even I'm, the role I'm playing here is the dumb sales leader. Sure, that's a role I'm playing, I swear. But in my mind, I'm like, this is just, a form. This is just an agreed upon task type in the CRM or a form that's required. And you don't do the call without the form. But maybe that's not actually the answer. And so I'm gonna kick to the experts that make up my panel and say, how do you actually make this happen at your company? How do you make sure sales reps aren't just dumping people in?
So I can lead this one, but this is I think what we see a lot in these questions is bad sales leadership. So no offense, Joe, but this is bad sales coaching, bad sales leadership. So there are bad SE leaders too. So, but this is bad sales leadership. And so if you don't have a dialogue between the SE and the account manager, I know I had my criteria. If an AM threw something over to me without like, hey, I need you to come to this meeting next week, and with literally nothing, and like not even like the topic, and Cisco's got an enormous portfolio, I would literally send them back a list. After you fill out this list, I'll accept your meeting, right? So, because I'm just not gonna show up with that and look like a fool. I'm gonna be prepared. And so, but it's the same thing. I think you can, if you can't have open dialogue and say, hey, when you do this, you set me up for failure. I may not be able to provide the right information to the customer, or you potentially waste my time, and this is a problem for me. So if you can't figure out how to have that dialogue, I had put this actually in the Slack channel. There's a really, really great free podcast out there. It's meant for managers to learn how to give feedback to their engineers, but I use it in all the time in daily life. It's called manager-tools.com, and the basics are free. And there's 4 podcasts, or 6, maybe there's even 6 now, on delivering feedback. And so I have actually made the AM and the SE sit both listen to this podcast, and then after every meeting, they had to deliver a rose and a thorn, one positive piece of feedback using the methodology, and one negative, constructive feedback. And so I would recommend that you try something like that as an intermediary to learn how to give feedback to the people you work with. And then if that fails, to your point, gently escalate to their manager.
Huge +1 for manager tools. It is, and they have for ICs, they also have a career tools podcast. They've been podcasting for over a decade, and there's just so much great content, but that feedback model they have, there's some really important things that it helps all of us to recognize that feedback's a gift. The best feedback is always one where the intent is always positive, and it's always focused on a future outcome where we're better together and more successful. And if you can actually learn that delivery model and be able to focus on, hey, I'm here together with you. We want to talk about what didn't go well, but specifically, here's how we can do this better tomorrow. There's so much positive that comes out of that you can actually, move together in a relationship to actually get better outcomes if you're able to communicate in a way where your positive intent isn't lost.
Fantastic. This is fantastic. So this actually concludes the audience question portion of the webinar, and I just want to take a second before we move on to the housekeeping. I just want to thank Dave and Stephanie and Cindy and Zach. This has been a real pleasure to work with you, total professionals, and I think your advice and your feedback's been amazing. And just having an opportunity to work with you and meet you a few times has been really, helpful to me. And so I want to thank you on behalf of the audience and James and Yuji at the PreSales Collective. We're gonna move into some announcements here, and I'm gonna launch a second poll, which is just basically, how we did today. And so I think I've ruined that poll, so I'm not going to launch the second poll. So if you have feedback on how we did today, you can message myself in Slack, or you can take it right to James and Yuji. What I want to announce is a little bit of social activism. This is very passionate. This is something I'm really passionate about. I work out with the team at Inner City Weightlifting. They're from Boston, where I'm from, and their program rescues people from the system, from juvenile hall and from prison, and they give them a path to a better life through personal training. And so the fees they collect from their personal training clients like myself fund caseworkers and social workers and the like. I've been working with them for about 5 years. I love the program. It's really, really important to me. And so what I've done is I've become an advocate for ICW, and my company works out as a team every Thursday at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. And we do it for team building and camaraderie. And it's just a lot of fun. And we love it because we know it's for a good cause. And so I've now converted this team workout to be public. And I'm inviting the entire PreSales Collective to come and meet my trainer and meet the team at Inner City Weightlifting and come work out for free over Zoom. It's very informal. It's very casual. You can tell I get like a dozen people any given week to come and work out with us. And I'd love it if you join me. So you can DM me, you can message me, and I'll give you the invite. It's every Thursday. It's free, and it's at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern. The next thing I would say is not to miss the next episode of the Real Talk series. I've got another fantastic set of panelists, and we're going to talk about pre-sales supporting the sales process. Things like gating people from going into an unverified trial, things like preventing deals from hitting closed won when there's not a technical match, things like making sure that the product feedback actually gets to product and that the response actually gets back to the prospect. And so ways that pre-sales can be, a benefit and a friend to the sales motion by enforcing it and being an extension of sales leadership. And so that's the topic we're going to do next time. And I hope you all register now. It's on PreSales Collective's website. You can go in there and register and make sure you block off your calendar for this one. Another thing I would be really, really thrilled to promote for James and Yuji is the next Women in Sales Excellence Kickoff, which is January 19th. And this is a program I'm also very, very passionate about. And I love the fact that the PreSales Collective is so, leaning into these things. And so I think it's really commendable. And I'd be remiss not to mention it. The last two things are the Slack community. There's almost 3,000 members in the Slack community right now. I hang out there every day. I love it in the pre-sales Slack community. I'm in there all the time. And so you're missing out on a ton of knowledge share and a ton of information and networking if you're not in there. And then the last thing I'll tell you about is the podcast. I like to listen to the podcast when I'm on my Peloton. It comes out every Monday. There's a new episode. I think it's great. It's on my listen list. I download it every time, or I link to it and I listen to it on the bike. But I think the pre-sales community is just doing such an amazing job of producing a variety of ways for you to engage and learn and share and network with your peers. And so I'm really grateful to be a part of this, and I'm really happy and grateful for the folks that attended today. Thank you once more on behalf of the panelists, on behalf of PreSales Collective, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you.